Politicians, especially in American politics, are both admired and disliked depending on whom you talk to, whether local, state, or nationally elected. Politicians are known for their choices, how they vote, and the stances they take. Most politicians swing back and forth in their beliefs, depending on how the political winds are shifting, often seeming to be part of the opposite political party in their behavior and voting record. But few politicians have so clearly shown track records of complete failure and financial mismanagement as the Democrats who run the state of California. From governors down to mayors, they have built an environment that has become unbearable for those who can and have left the state. Los Angeles is a prime example of a city that has collapsed in a state and is barely on life support. Only the obituary hasn't been posted yet. Who is Mayor Karen Bass? What's her background? What have her policies been? How do people like her keep getting re-elected? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Music Karen Bass was born on October 3, 1953, in Los Angeles, California. Her mother was Wilmina Du, a homemaker, and her father was Dit Talmadge Bass, a postal worker. They lived in the Venice and Fairfax districts of Los Angeles. While in middle school, Bass began volunteering for Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign and graduated from Alexander Hamilton High School in 1971. Bass studied philosophy at San Diego State University from 1971 to 1973 and completed the physician assistant program at the USC Keck School of Medicine in 1982. But in the mid-1970s, she was an organizer for the Vince Ramos Brigade, a pro-Cuban revolutionary group that arranged trips by Americans to Cuba. She visited Cuba 8 times in the 1970s. Bass was an avowed communist, an active member in the Vince Ramos Brigade, a Marxist training program tied to Fidel Castro's regime aimed at radicalizing young Americans into communist thinking. It wasn't for cultural exchange, but for ideological brainwashing. The trips to Cuba were supposedly to work in solidarity with the Cuban people, often harvesting sugarcane or joining in construction projects. In truth, it was a militant training program teaching young radicals like Bass the darker arts of sabotage. The main objective was to protest what they called US imperialism and support the Cuban Revolution. Bass's involvement with the Vince Brigade is notable. A Los Angeles police investigator testified before Congress about the group, stating that its members were trained in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and bomb-making. Bass was not just a participant, she was a leader, visiting Cuba multiple times and praising Castro, a dictator infamous for his oppressive rule. Even after Castro's death, Bass called it a great loss to the Cuban people, a statement that raises doubts about her alignment with such a controversial figure. These trips weren't illegal, but they were monitored by the FBI and CIA during the Cold War because Cuba was a communist dictatorship and a hostile geopolitical rival. One of her frequent companions was Susan Rosenberg, who was also closely tied to the Weather Underground founders. Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn all were key in coordinating the brigade's U.S. scuba operations. Dorn even negotiated directly with the Cuban government to arrange the trips for American radicals. Ayers was also one of Barack Obama's Chicago mentors during his youth radicalization. Whenever the Vince Ramos Brigade delegation arrived in Cuba, they were hosted by the Institute of Friendship and the People's ICAP, an organization closely linked to the Cuban Communist government. ICAP or IAP is headed by Fernando Gonzalez York, a former member of the WASP network, a group of Cuban spies convicted in the United States for espionage. In an exclusive interview with ADN America, former Cuban intelligence officer Enrique Garcia Diaz confirmed that IAP serves a dual role, officially promoting solidarity while quietly aiding Cuban intelligence operations. Garcia Diaz confirmed those claims directly to ADN America, saying that once potential targets are recruited, Havana looks for ways to use those individuals' positions in American society. In essence, Bass, among others, is a communist plant within the U.S. government, at both the federal and state levels. The Vince Brigade's connections to domestic terror groups are well documented. Among its recruits was Suzanne Rosenberg, a member of the M19 or May 19th Communist Organization, an offshoot of the Weather Underground, who took part in the November 7, 1983, bombing of the U.S. Capitol. Rosenberg was the most high-profile person, convicted along with 6 others in the Capitol bombing, and later pardoned by President Bill Clinton. Due to her close ties with Karen Bass, many believe that Bass was also pardoned. This is false, as she was never indicted or convicted in that case. In addition to the Capitol bombing, the indictment charged the 7 with conspiring to set off explosives at 3 Washington military installations and several sites in New York, including an FBI office on Staten Island, the Israeli Aircraft Industries Building, the South African Consulate, and the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. The conspirators also were accused of scouting other bombing targets as part of their armed propaganda campaign, including the old Executive Office building next to the White House, the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, and the Army Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, and Bass knew them all. The defendants included Elizabeth N. Duke, who was still being sought as a fugitive, Laura Whitehorn, Linda Evans, Marilyn Buck, and the mentioned Susan Rosenberg, Timothy Blunk, and Alan Berkman, all of whom were imprisoned for other crimes, according to a Justice Department spokesman. In the alleged conspiracy, which started in July 1982 and ran until May 23, 1985, the defendants and unnamed co-conspirators, and many believe that Karen Bass is one of those, operated under the organizational names Revolutionary Fighting Group, Armed Resistance Unit, and the Red Guerrilla Resistance. Bass later earned a Bachelor of Science with a major in Health Sciences from California State University, Dominguez Hills, in 1990. Bass later obtained a Master of Social Work from the USC, Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work in 2015, while serving in the House of Representatives. Bass never renounced her communist leanings. In fact, by taking the oath of office in Congress, or as a mayor, she has clearly violated those oaths through her actions, such as supporting a sanctuary city for illegal immigrant criminals, risking public safety in violation of federal immigration law. Bass being an elected official is remarkable, but not unheard of. Many individuals with open and proven communist sympathies have served in Congress, but the surprising part is those same people would by their own actions be ineligible to serve in the U.S. military, and we all take the oath to defend the Constitution and protect the nation, which is impossible if you support any form of socialism. But Bass is just one in a long list of progressive Democrats who have used socialist tactics to tighten their grip on their cities and states, lowering the quality of life for residents and increasing the major issues they claim to be fixing, much to the harm of their constituents. Bass made headlines when it surfaced that she was out of the country during the first crucial days of the Palisades fire, one of the worst disasters in Los Angeles history. Instead of handling the crisis, Bass was attending the inauguration of the newly sworn communist president of Ghana, Dramani Mahama, further highlighting her strong ties to global leftist movements. Critics are calling for a deeper probe into Bass's radical past and her connections with groups tied to domestic terrorism, especially as the city of Los Angeles struggles with her divisive leadership during these ongoing crises. One reason for this renewed focus is Chris Simmons, a former Defense Intelligence Agency operative who played a key role in uncovering Cuban spies in the U.S. He told AD in America that any contact between IAP and U.S. officials or their families should raise alarms given the organization's record of intelligence gathering. But Bass was not just a member, she was a leader. She was described as a leader of the group in a 1975 communist publication, according to Politico, although her office attempted damage control and denied she ever held that role. But the proof shows otherwise. Simmons also stated later, they are targeted once recruited against people of interest. If for family reasons or personal traits, they had the potential to infiltrate government or political institutions, they are guided to tone down their radical public stances so they could, and can better blend themselves for the future, as was done with convicted Cuban spy, Annabelle Montes. In fact, according to a report published by Tablet magazine, Bass oversaw the movement's Southern California operations. In fact, an October 1975 issue of the Communist Daily World newspaper described Bass as leader of the Vinceramus Brigade in Southern California. Another PhD dissertation recorded her as a brigadista and then organizer for the Vinceramos Brigades, saying Karen visited Cuba every 6 months. Bass herself has claimed that her involvement was fueled by a desire to build connections between the American and Cuban people, and she has voiced admiration for aspects of the Cuban dictatorship's social programs. But Bass is not alone. Several current and former U.S. lawmakers have also been connected to the Vinceramos Brigade and Fidel Castro. According to Reason magazine, prominent Democratic figures include Gregory Meeks, Democrat, Congressman from New York, Barbara Lee, Democrat, former Congresswoman from Northern California, Bill Della, Democrat, Massachusetts, former Congressman, Leon Panetta, Democrat, former Congressman from California, who later served as Secretary of Defense and Director of the CIA, Chris Dodd, Democrat, Connecticut, former Senator from that state, Tom Harkin, Democrat from Iowa, former Senator, Antonio Villaraigosa, Democrat, former Mayor of Los Angeles, who also traveled to Cuba with the brigade, and many others. They all joined Susan Rosenberg, a former member of the domestic terror group May 19th Communist Organization. So, it would seem that the communists are firmly embedded within American politics. Despite all of this, Bass was elected to the California State Assembly in 2004 and was the first African-American woman to serve as Speaker of any U.S. state legislature in 2008. She became a community activist and also served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2011 to 2022, chairing the Congressional Black Caucus. Bass also backed the chaos and riots of 2020, along with progressive Democrats like Jerry Nadler, Kamala Harris, and Nancy Pelosi, all who also supported Antifa and Black Lives Matter uprisings, and see our video on those two topics. As a speaker, Bass promoted numerous laws to enhance the state's child welfare system. During her first year, she pushed through expansion of healthy families, insurance coverage to prevent children from going without medical insurance, and worked to remove bureaucratic barriers to the certification of small businesses. She also secured over $2.3 million to help restore the historic Vision Theater in Los Angeles, and more than $600 million for Los Angeles Unified School District. Although it would not seem the money did much good given the scores coming out of those schools. For students, Bass worked with the governor and launched the California Commission on the 21st Century Economy to reform California's tax code. She also fought to dismantle the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. But Bass's efforts may have been self-serving, as none of those projects produced results, and the city was pushed ever deeper into debt and higher taxes, which happened across the state. Bass naturally backed the campaigns of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and her loyalty was rewarded. She was selected as the frontrunner to be the vice presidential pick for Joseph Biden, and see our 4 videos on Biden. But Bass was criticized for a remark she made in 2016 on the death of Cuba's leader Fidel Castro, which she called a great loss to the Cuban people. Bass said that she had been trying to offer her condolences to the Cuban population, but added that it's certainly something she would not say again. Bass must have ignored the hundreds of thousands of Cubans who escaped that island nation to try to reach American shores to gain freedom. But Bass's problems were not over. Her communist history was coming back to haunt her. And even the most progressive left-wing socialist Democrats, initially working under the radar, saw that having Bass on the ticket was a disaster waiting to happen. Mainstream America, including many reasonable Democrats, would never elect a known communist. When Biden finally chose Kamala Harris as his running mate, Bass tweeted that Kamala Harris is a great choice for vice president. Her determined pursuit of justice and relentless advocacy for the people is what is needed right now. Spoiler alert, we will have a video on Kamala Harris in November 2020. Biden then considered Bass for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and Secretary of Health and Human Services. But her history once again came back to trouble Democrats. Her confirmation hearings and questioning about her past from Republicans would have been damaging for the Democrat platform. Ultimately, Biden nominated Ohio Representative Marcia Fudge and California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to those posts respectively to avoid the controversy. But Bass was elected mayor of Los Angeles in 2022, which proved disastrous for the city in every area. This was accelerated when a video resurfaced revealing her Marxist roots, which is now spreading online. Documentary filmmaker Errol Weber recently exposed Bass's involvement with the Vince Brigade and her 15 trips to Cuba and her support of spreading communism through violent revolution on a worldwide scale. Given all the information that is known about Bass, despite the best efforts of liberal media outlets and publications to deny, downplay, or even hide her past, the facts raise troubling questions about her radical political ideology and style of governance. But when cornered, Bass has publicly said the trips to Cuba shaped her views on healthcare and international solidarity, not communist beliefs. She and her handlers claimed that she did not participate in Vinceremis Brigade trips to Cuba in her youth. We know that is false. There are documented records. Bass later said in interviews that she regretted the phrasing of her comments and made it clear that she does not support authoritarian governments. But facts are very stubborn things. However, it would seem that Bass and the Democrats, especially under the Biden administration, continued their corruption. They secured federal funding, such as $21.8 million in 2024, and later, another $22 million via FEMA, specifically from the DHS FEMA Shelter and Services Program to support newly arrived migrant families with food, housing, medical help, and transportation. And please see our videos on the wildfires, FEMA, and Alejandro Mayorkas. The main defense Democrats use is that those aren't taxpayer-funded cash payouts. They're funded by private charitable contributions. What they fail to mention is that, in some cases, that is true, but millions of tax dollars were funneled to NGOs under the table who then used that money for illegals as a cover. This was pushed by Mayor Bass's political initiative. In mid-July 2025, she signed an executive order prompting nonprofits like Chera and philanthropic partners to hand out cash cards worth a couple of $100s to each family affected by ICE raids. Remember, it is a sanctuary city and a sanctuary. State Democrat supporters insisted this is a legal, federally funded humanitarian action as part of LA's sanctuary city policies meant to protect vulnerable populations and ensure community unity. But a forensic audit of where taxpayer money went is troubling for Bass and Governor Gavin Newsom. In effect, California taxpayers are expected to support illegals who will not work or are afraid to work for fear of being arrested. That is interfering with a federal law enforcement operation that is enforcing federal immigration law. Bass also revised Sanctuary City rules to train her staff on how to avoid aiding ICE. That is a felony with several million counts if you consider every illegal they protect. But where did the money truly come from? A leaked memo dated January 6, 2024, reveals that Karen Bass demanded her fire department cut an extra $49 million, just 1 week before the wildfires started, from their budgets. This cut was already on top of $17.6 million of cuts in her newest budget. Again, see our video on those California wildfires and FEMA. the extra cuts requested just days before the fires broke out and destroyed swaths of Los Angeles would have shut down 16 fire stations and crippled the department's ability to respond to emergencies. This was in fact demonstrated during the devastating LA wildfires, and Bass, as well as Newsom, are still under fire for her poor handling of the crisis. Her leadership has drawn sharp criticism, and a recall election is being organized against her. These funds being diverted from firefighting efforts to activist groups supporting illegals have raised concerns about Bass's dedication to public safety and competent governance. Also, Bass and the city council, with the backing of Governor Gavin Newsom, decided to keep their sanctuary city and state policy for illegals at the expense of their own American citizens, especially veterans. Bass had said that she supported more housing in Los Angeles, but that she opposed changing zoning laws so that denser housing would be allowed in neighborhoods that mandate single-family housing. At that time, 3/4 of all residentially zoned land in Los Angeles was exclusively zoned for single-family housing. However, in true political fashion, despite her previous comments, Bass is now supportive of Newsom and the California state government rezoning those areas destroyed by the fire, where up to 12,000 people lost their pricey homes. Only about 100 permits to rebuild have been granted to date. The rest of those ruined properties are being taken over by the state, using public money to acquire them at pennies on the dollar to build low-income multipurpose housing, such as housing and urban development Section 8 complexes, ostensibly to make space for the homeless and illegal migrant population. However, if this plan succeeds, it may also aid homeless veterans, but we will have to wait. The effort to recall Mayor Karen Bass is currently active in Los Angeles, California. A notice of the intent to recall Bass was filed with the city clerk on March 18, 2025. The recall push is organized by the Recall Karen Bass Committee following the Palisades fire in January 2025. Mayor Karen Bass, politician, communist sympathizer, community activist, and radical Democrat, is just one of many left-wing figures who have helped ruin not just California, but many other areas in the nation. One must still wonder, what kind of citizens continue to vote for these self-destructive agendas and the politicians who enforce them? Many point to the fact that California is essentially a one-party state, where elections are always disputed. Perhaps the mass flight of businesses and residents with the means to escape California speaks volumes, and the remaining people will come to their senses in the future. One can only hope. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you enjoyed what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe.